Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
Our Jewish observances were a priority. That was a great concern to our families, that their children should be brought up in this new environment and new, literally, non-Jewish atmosphere, that they would have the strength of knowing that they were of the Jewish faith and could worship as such and carry on our culture and traditions. The high holy days were very important in our observance, and we had no particular religious program here on the island because our center certainly was established much later. Papa would close the store. We'd make a sign and put it on the store door and say, you know, closed for the holidays, for the Jewish holidays, and when we'd be back. And we'd go to New Bedford, and later we would go to Boston. And we would observe the holidays there, and then we would come home. We children did not go to school on our Jewish holidays. In our faith, in the Orthodox faith, you had to have 10 men in order to be able to have a legitimate service. Today, with Reform Judaism now, a new chapter in our faith, women are acceptable and women have a par. But in those early days, we had 6 families, so there were 6 men. When we had 10 families, there was already growing toward 10 families. A little community felt that it would be good if we had our own place of worship here so that we wouldn't have to go off island. And so they bought a Torah, and we used to meet in the living room at Sam Kronig's house across from the center now, and sometimes they'd meet in our living room. We would line up the chairs like in a theater. We would take all the chairs in the house, their house, and or we'd get some additional chairs, and we'd have our High Holy Day services here. And as the little community grew, it was the hope and intent of our little community that we'd have our own place of worship. And so that's how the Martha's Vineyard Hebrew Center became a reality. Briefly, what happened was, where the center is now was a cow pasture owned by Bishop Whittemore of the Episcopal Church. Mr. Dean, who was the publisher of the first 2 volumes of the bank's history, he lived in this lovely white house, and he wanted to sell his house, so Henry Kronig bought the house, and then it was turned over to our little Jewish community. And I can remember in those early days, houses were moved with horse and wagon, and I think it was Harry Horton's big long wagon and his horse or horses that moved that, and it was moved up through the apple orchard of Sam Kronig's house right up the street here on Center Street and placed onto the pasture land that Bishop Whittemore had, and that's where our center was redone for worshiping, for activities and so forth. We felt a great commitment to the slowly increasing population of the Jewish faith who came here in the summers. And our little community was busy earning a living, and we didn't have any paid leadership, but we made up a program through the volunteer aspects to have services every Friday night. We had a very strong lecture series going on, made up of all kinds of people who came. Pat Putnam went to the Congo to study the Pygmies, the clergy from the churches came. Abba Eben came, and we had noted rabbinical people, Rabbi Brickner being one of them, who was renowned throughout the country, because every Friday night we had a very distinguished person. I do want to share with you more than just historical fact, though. What a wonderful, wonderful pleasure it was, and we were so proud. We had our own center, and this was a fulfillment of the dreams that this little band of 6 families had when they came to America. To be able to have a life here, to be assimilated into a community, and above all, to be the best citizens this country ever had.
We used to meet in various members' homes. There were very few people of the Jewish faith here on the island 55 years ago. For as much as we had in the way of religious services, the home served the purpose very well. The Passover holiday, the first night of the Passover, the different families would bring their family food here, and we'd have a little Passover Seder, and a glass of wine, and the unleavened bread. You know my house, the dining room connects to the living room, and they had these sawhorses and boards put over them and tablecloths over that, so that we had a whole family celebrating the Passover together. So we did have some religious life, to a certain extent. Passover was an important holiday, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that was about it, actually. So there were 3 holidays that we observed. I never heard of Hanukkah when I was growing up, but because Christmas comes at that time of year, Hanukkah has become more important on the Jewish calendar as sort of a consolation prize for the children of the Jewish faith, I think. It's a very minor holiday. Before they began to have services here, we went to New Bedford to attend services there. And one year there was a hotel in Onset, and they stayed open longer so that people of the Jewish faith could go there for the High Holy Days. It was sort of like going to a vacation resort, you know, and the men would go to services and the women would prance around in their new dresses or whatever. And that was the High Holy Days for a child. This is what the High Holy Days were all about. Of course, as you get older, you begin to learn a little more on your own. When I was a youngster, there was the Hebrew teacher who used to come over once a week. Mainly it was to teach the boys. Girls were not important in my generation of growing up. We were second-class citizens as far as families were concerned. I had good parents, but girls were not important. But he would teach Hebrew. As a matter of fact, my mother used to sit with us in the evening trying to teach us how to read the Hebrew letters. I didn't understand it as a language, but I could recognize the letters and could put the words together. And this retired Hebrew teacher would come over, and he told my mother she was wasting her time. We didn't have a Torah until we got the building, because then you had a place to keep the Torah. So the first Torah was bought by the Kronig family in memory of their parents. It was dedicated in memory of my father's and his brother's parents. So that was the first. There's 2 Torahs there. One was rescued from a synagogue from somewhere in Europe. It survived World War II. And so somehow or other we were informed about these Torahs that were available. So we have 2 of them.
We had wonderful parties there for the servicemen up at the center. Gosh, Dottie and I, we decided to have like a Las Vegas night or something. And I dripped candles. My mother almost threw me out of the house. I dripped bottles, candles. And we had that, and we had the red checkered tablecloths. And we went down on the beach, and I'll tell you something. we found netting, we found fishnet that we hung on the walls, and we found a sign that said dinner with the ends going the. It was more fun, but they had to paint the walls when we got through though, because the fishnet is dirty. We didn't even think of that. Just very effective, and it was nice. We had candlelight. We had it. I'll tell you, it was wonderful.
These were mostly Jewish servicemen that would come to the
No,
center.
to the center? Not really, but we tried to because they had no place to go. They had absolutely no place to go. But if anybody else, any of the other fellows wanted to come, it was fine. The truck would come down from Peaked Hill down to Vineyard Haven every, certain hours. And then they'd have to run down and pick it up and go back. And I know that some nights when some of the fellows couldn't make it, I remember a few nights that Dottie and I went up to Peaked Hill at night to bring them their goodies. Because, if we knew, we saved our ration tickets. And if we knew they were coming, we'd get corned beef and bologna and all that sort of stuff that they like and use it that way. And we know you have to prepare in advance for all these things. So, and I can remember going up there, no lights, just pitch black, and delivering stuff to them.
Before we were in the center, we had the services here, and I just assumed that was a natural thing that happened through life, that people had services in their house. We would have sawhorses with as many doors as we could put on them. I don't know where they put the dining room table, but the doors would go all the way to the kitchen door, just enough room so you could walk in and out. And everybody would bring pots of food. It was such a lot of fun. And we had an uncle that came over from Nantucket. And none of us could understand a word he said. He read the prayers so fast that we always assumed that's the way it had to be. I remember going once to New Bedford and celebrating this holiday, Simchas Torah. It means the finish of the Torah. It's the end of the year. And seeing kids, I wouldn't get up and do it with the kids, but they marched around with flags with an apple on the flagpole. And I'd never seen such a thing, never heard of it. We didn't have a lot of holidays like that. And I was flabbergasted at this. But once in a while, maybe twice in my whole life, we went over to Onset for the holiday because my mother insisted on having a weekend off. We did get together sometimes, big picnics, the whole community. The Millers lived, he was a junk dealer, and they had a big plot of land on the Edgartown Road near where the telephone company on that side of the road. They had a couple of acres, and so they'd have big picnics there once a year. That was fun. We became a congregation in 38, but we opened in 40. And the first year that we were in the center, I remember on Yom Kippur, we all fasted, we young girls and boys. And at night, we went to Mrs. LeBeau's and had a sundae. She made the best sundaes. I can still remember how good they were. Nobody has ever made such good ones. Or maybe because we were hungry, after fasting all day, and so proud of ourselves because we did fast.
So when you were young, who were the essential people at the Hebrew Center?
My mother and father, and my father's brothers, and of course the older Brickmans, and the Millers, they moved away because we weren't Orthodox, and the Osmonds moved away because we weren't Orthodox. And the Pearlsteins, he was our first president, and she was the women's president. We had two groups, the women and the men, which was good because the women make the money, and we used to be so proud. We would give them, $500 or $600 a year, and we were so proud of ourselves. We would have card parties or bake sales, rummage sales, which made good money, even sell chances on things. Ida Levine would have chances in her store for a turkey at Thanksgiving, and she'd get really mad if you didn't buy one. It was only 25 cents. We really raised it little by little by little till we could burn that mortgage. In an ashtray, we burned a piece of paper. It was exciting because we were earning every penny of it, and it was exciting to have our own place. And we were so proud of always being cohesive. When we were in the center, we had visiting rabbis. People sometimes didn't even charge. Most of the time didn't even charge. They were happy to do it. They were happy we were there. So they didn't even charge anything. They don't do that now. But then they did. And it was just great having our own building and our own everything. We didn't buy the parking lot next door for several years after that. Bishop Page, who realized that we were a pretty good congregation, he was at our dedication, along with every minister that was here, was invited, because it was in June, I think, and the year I graduated in June. And so he sold it to us for maybe $400. It was really very little, which was nice of him to do. And we had Rabbi Brickner's father came and dedicated it for us. He was a nifty guy, and his son is a nifty guy. When Neil had his bar mitzvah, I didn't have any money. It was so thrilling because this Rabbi Brickner came, and he was wonderful. All my friends from school, I invited every adult, and a lot of them were Catholic. And one or two of them said to me, I would switch if you had him all the time. He was just so good, and he wouldn't take 5 cents for coming. He flew from New York and wouldn't take 5 cents. Wasn't that something?
That's wonderful.
To be that nice?
It was incorporated in 1940. Of course, I didn't come on the scene until, say, 47, 48. There might have been 25 families who really you would consider full members. And in the summer, of course, there were more. Maybe not members. I don't think we even had a summer membership at first. Bernie was the secretary. When I came here, he was already included and had made himself very much at home. But I didn't need any special invitations, and I just knew that was where I belonged, and I felt very much at home. Because I came from a small town congregation, and it wasn't too different. In the summer, they had a volunteer program, and Dorothy and Alice, and probably Anne if she was here, because she was working in New York during part of those years. But Dorothy and Alice pretty much took over and made the arrangements. And we had occasionally visiting, there were rabbis who summered here, many Hillel rabbis. So Dorothy would accost them, and it was all volunteer. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. There was no money. Nobody had any money, and it was an interesting time. We had a religious school. I'm thinking back, to when Judy was a little girl. There were various teachers, over periods of years. There was one man he lived in Fall River, and he would fly over once a week, and they would have a religious school. As far as services in the winter, unless it was a holiday, I can't seem to remember services. But if for any holiday, we would observe and have a celebration, have a party and whatever. But everything was volunteer. Sometimes we have a guest speaker or something special, celebrate anniversaries of the organization of the community. In the summer, there were Friday night services. There could be just any kind of person speaking on a Friday night. Interesting people. It could be an actor. I think Dory Sherry spoke one Friday night. And then as we began to get a little more serious about this, we said, that's not proper. If we get them to speak, it shouldn't be on a Friday night, and we should start hiring rabbis. So we had a whole list of regulars for just maybe one Friday through the summer. But a different one each, say for 10 consecutive Fridays, we would have a different rabbi each time. And we were paying them. We would pay their fees and put them up and whatever. We had due structures. Then we had fundraising things. We had cake sales. We had bazaars. We had a white elephant table. We had somebody doing fortunes with cards or whatever, reading tea leaves. We had pony rides in the field. My table was with the new merchandise that we begged from the stores, put my pride in my pocket and went begging. Just about everybody was very generous and very nice about it. And then we had the hot dogs and hamburger. We had the grills going with the medical staff manning those, which was Joe Frisch and Dave Rappaport. And Jack Levitt was usually in charge. He would walk around. And in the fields is where they had the pony rides. And they had some games for the kids. And then at some point, I know they used to have contests for decorating doll carriages, and it was good, wholesome fun. We used to be so worried about rain. Then it got so hot on that side of the building because the sun is there, all morning. And so Yale built this grandiose awning because he used to do sails for the boats. And so he had all that material, and he built this great awning so that the workers, at least, working on the stoves and in the sun, and he saved their lives. And then we had beach umbrellas for some of the tables. It was very colorful, actually, and balloons and all kinds of things. And then we used to have a table at the street fair with some kind of a Jewish delicacy. I swear we introduced bagels to the island. We did a bagels and cream cheese thing. One year we had corned beef sandwiches, and another year we had noodle puddings, which nobody else had ever seen before. And of course, everybody in the membership made them. They weren't two alike, which was hysterical. In size, in consistency, in appearance, they were all different. And for Passover, we used to have a Passover breakfast. Bernie, he and his cousin Yale, and sometimes David Kronig, and later years Ronnie Tolan filled in, and they would have a breakfast for anybody who wanted to come. And it was always fun. Sometimes we had a speaker. Of course, those were the formative years for Israel, which was so important. And each summer we would have an Israel Bond breakfast and have guest speakers. Mrs. Dukakis spoke once, Kitty Dukakis, and her husband came along with her. He said he was just a guest, and she was the focal point. And Art Buchwald spoke once, and Richard Dreyfuss was the main speaker once. Did I mention the choir that we had? Oh, it was funny. It was all strictly volunteer, from grandparents down to little kids. But there was such camaraderie. I mean, it was just so much fun, even though we weren't that good. We thought we were terrific, but nobody took it terribly seriously. We did our best. We gave it everything we had. But if we couldn't sing well, we just sang loud. And then probably late 1970s, 1980s, Harry Gersh was living here. And he wrote a lot of books for children that were used in religious schools. They all had to do with aspects of Judaism. And he was very much interested in religion. And he started a regular routine of classes of adult ed, and they were very well attended. And it was really very interesting. He would talk, present, and we all would have a copy of his book and do our homework, most of us, and then have a discussion afterwards. And people seemed to be hungry for that sort of thing. And it was strictly volunteerism on his part. He was retired by that time. And then following Harry, Rabbi Hellman, he too had an adult ed class. And these were Wednesdays, very early afternoon. And there would be maybe 25 people who would show up, which was incredible for those times. And through the winter, and he was very interesting, and he was with us for several years, almost as a full-time rabbi. And he was a really nice guy. The only thing that people objected to was he was a heavy chain smoker. Everybody's got something. There's always something. A rabbi's position in a congregation is under such scrutiny. It's worse than the President of the United States. The President of the United States has nothing on the rabbi of a diverse congregation. It takes time, to get used to someone and to accept them, especially when things are very different from what you're used to. Right. So I think that's part of it. Of course, now we have Rabbi Joshua Plout. I think he's been with us close to 6 years. Of course, he was here with the advent of the new building, which was momentous. We dedicated that to Rabbi and Mrs. Rayfield Hellman, because they were here when we were, for 10 years, we were in the process of trying to make the plans. What do we want? Where do we want it? And there was a lot of almost hair pulling. It was painful. It was worse than giving birth. A good, at least 10 years. We knew we had to do something. We had outgrown it. It was passe in many ways. It wasn't up to code. And some of our members were getting older. And we had a staircase. The sanctuary was upstairs. And that made it very difficult for people. And then when it came high holidays, we had an overflow. And we put in closed circuit TV downstairs, and people still reminiscing about that. It's fairly nostalgic, but it was not appreciated. Watched on TV what was going on upstairs because there was no room at the inn. Then somebody made this suggestion, and he said, why don't we just knock the building down and start with it? Because whatever we do, we're going to wind up with still an old building. Oh, we were just aghast, especially the old timers who were so attached to that old building. And now it's like it never was. Anyway, that was something we lived through. It's a community effort and evolving as the community changes, as time changes things. I think Judaism itself is an evolving religion. I think that's part of it. And we're a little more flexible than maybe some churches are. And there's a lot of participation.